welcome back to the Shattered Star Quilt Along. We are now in week 8. I can't believe it. So this is the last week where we're going to be wrapping up our Shattered Star quilts, getting the binding on, and posting them on Instagram so we can all see our beautiful quilts that we've made. So in today's video, what I want to start off with is how to square up your quilts before you attach your binding. This step was a little bit tricky. It kind of stumped me for a little while, so I thought I'd walk you through how I go about doing it. Before we dive into the tutorial, I wanted to just go over what tools and notions you're going to need to square up your Shattered Star quilt. You don't need a lot of tools, which is great. The first one being obviously is a rotary cutter. Some people will prefer using scissors. I find I get sharper corners when I use a rotary cutter, so that's my go-to. I use 2 rulers. You certainly don't need both rulers, but I find that the combo of the 2 gives me really good results. So the first one is a 12.5 by 12.5 square ruler. I find this genius for the corners. And then I use an 8.5 by 24 inch to trim up the longer sides. You'll also need a cutting mat, self-healing cutting mat. And aside from that, well, you're going to need your Shattered Star quilt quilted. And other than that, that's all you need. Let's dive in. Okay, so the first place I like to start is always on a corner. I find that this just kind of helps me keep everything nice and orderly. So I find that starting with my 12.5 by 12.5 inch ruler, plus my rotary cutter, plus my quilted Shattered Star quilt, and I've got my self-healing cutting mat underneath. So what I do is I just place the ruler on the corner, and what I'm looking to do is I typically try and find a line in my quilt. So in one of my blocks, I'll find a line that kind of gives me a straight edge within my quilt, and then I will line it up. So I line it up on that line. So here I've got a line here that I'm lining up on. Once I find that line, I use that as my guide to kind of keep everything nice and square. So it also means that I'm keeping things square in relation to the quilt design. If you're off a little bit, it really doesn't matter. Don't stress too much about it. I just find that trying to get, if you find one line and kind of use that as your base jumping off point, it kind of keeps everything else nice and square. So once you have that line figured out and lined up, what I'm doing now is I'm looking to make sure that I'm then aligned on the edge. Now, when you quilt, sometimes things shift. This is normal. This happens to me on a regular basis. Even with using a walking foot and playing with the pressure of my presser foot, I still sometimes end up with some shifting and things don't necessarily all line up equally. I don't let this stress me. I just kind of roll with it, and as long as I have enough within to get a nice straight edge and that I have enough to cover for my 1/4 inch seam allowance when I attach the binding, I don't worry about it too much. So that's kind of my MO, how I approach it. So hopefully that helps kind of take some of the stress out of getting this all nice and square. But then once I have that line figured out and have myself all lined up and feel like I've got a nice straight edge, I then come in and take my first cut. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in with my rotary cutter, and I cut along one edge like that, and then I come around the other edge and I cut that side like so. So now I have a nice square corner. You'll see I have a little bit of batting showing through. That's okay. Don't stress about it. Right now, you can always come back and retrim if needed, but right now I just want to try and keep things as lined up as possible so that things are nice and square. Once I have a corner squared up, I then move my quilt up on the one side and move it on my mat so that I can then come in with my longer 24 inch ruler and start trimming up the long edge. So all I do is find where I've made that cut So I follow the line. Yeah, you can see that. So I'm following the edge that I've already trimmed up here from cutting the corner. And now I'm just using that as a guide to now come down and trim the rest of this side up. And making sure that I'm catching as much of the batting to come off, but preserving as much of the quilt top as possible. And if you have any points, this would be where you want to make sure that you're not cutting into too far into your seam allowance where you're going to lose a point. I don't have any points on this edge, so I can just kind of keep cutting with peace of mind. So I got that one done. Now I just shift it back up and lay it out flat. Come back in with my long ruler, and I'm gonna still continuing using that initial cut as my guide. I'm gonna now come down and trim the rest of this side. There we go. Now, as we get closer to the bottom corner, I'm gonna flip it so that now I'm set up to do another corner. And we're going to repeat that process. So all I'm doing is shifting things around. Sorry, I've got my camera equipment in my way, so I've got less room to cut here. But basically I'm coming now down to my second corner. I'm going to switch back to my 12.5-inch ruler. And I'm going to line this up. Again, finding a line in my quilt that I can get a nice straight line, making sure I'm still keeping an alignment with this cut edge, and then making sure that I have a nice clean edge on the corner. So I'm just gonna maneuver here. I'm just gonna take my time, because that's a key component of quilting, I find, is to not rush things and make sure that you're all lined up. And so that things are nice and square and you're not taking off too much of your quilt top and getting most of the batting and excess backing. So I cut again, and then I come around the other side and I cut from the bottom. And there I've got now one full side squared up, and I've got 2 corners trimmed. I'm just gonna keep doing that process, going from corner to corner, trimming up each edge until I have all 4 sides nicely trimmed. Okay, I've tried to position you in a way that you can kind of see what I'm doing, just so that you can see it from different angles. Hopefully that will help make it clearer for you guys. So I just finished, this is my second corner that I just trimmed up. Now I'm gonna be coming down this edge. So I'm just switching back to my longer ruler because I'm on my straightaway, as I like to refer to them. Coming up to my third corner, so I'm reaching for my square. up your quilt tops, getting them ready for attaching the binding. So I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment box down below. I'm always happy to help you guys out. And if you found any of the tips helpful or you learned something new, don't forget to like the video and hit subscribe so you don't miss out on any future tutorials. Have a good one.